Hi guys, Olive here. Today I'm here to do another dual review video for you. In today's video, I would like to review two coming-of-age novels, one that was published 75 years ago and one that was recently published. The reason why I decided to review these books together is that I found that they had very interesting similarities and differences. In both, we follow young girls in very challenging situations, but one lives in a very urban area and one very rural. Both of these characters have very strong mother figures in their lives. They each have a brother. They each have a father with an alcohol problem. I really enjoyed both of these books, but for very different reasons, as it turned out. So I thought in today's video I would review both of them, talk about their similarities and their differences, and how that ended up affecting my reading experience of both overall. So let's first start with the older of the two, now considered to be a modern classic, that is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. This is, of course, a coming-of-age tale that is set in Brooklyn in the early 20th century. The character at the center of this story is a young girl named Francie Nolan, who is 11 years old when we first meet her. She and her family are very poor. Her mother, Katie, works extremely hard to make ends meet since her father, Johnny, is an alcoholic and cannot always be trusted to bring in an income. This book is Francie's story, the story of her family's background, beginning with her grandparents, moving through her young childhood, and then through her adolescence, up to the point where she's in her late teen years. Through the years, we see Francie's family experience love and joy, but also grief, hunger, and despair. But through it all, we see the great strength, pride, and perseverance that this family has. This book is highly autobiographical, being very strongly influenced by Betty Smith's own upbringing, and I felt this the most strongly in the characters and the setting. This book has a fairly large cast of very multifaceted and deeply flawed characters. Francie's father, Johnny, though he is incurably alcoholic, is still a very charming and deeply loving man who has a very strong bond with Francie. Her Aunt Sissy is illiterate and very promiscuous, but is also entirely non-judgmental and is so eager to care for others. And Francie's mother, Katie, struggles to love her children equally, but at the end of the day, there is nothing she wouldn't do for both of them. These are the type of characters that are so well and so consistently written that they don't feel like characters in a book. They feel like real people you know who you are merely paying a visit to when you open up the book. But the other real strength of this book is making you feel that you are in Brooklyn during this time period. New York flows through this book's veins. It's not the glamorous Manhattan or the hipster artist retreat that Brooklyn is today, but it is a neighborhood in New York with all different sorts of people. It's rather dirty, pretty crass, and very unforgiving, but it also has its own beauty, its own quiet among the chaos. It has a feeling of community and support in between all the self-interest that you always find in a city. Though the New York we know today is very different than the one portrayed in this novel, I did see peaks at the New York culture that I know of today's New York. For instance, there is one scene in this book where Francie and her younger brother, Neely, win a Christmas tree. Close to Christmas, the man who sells the Christmas tree is looking to get rid of his excess stock. He knows he's not going to be able to sell those trees, so he may as well give them away. The way you win one is by lining up and picking a tree, and you can take it home with you if, when this tree seller throws the tree at you with all of his might, you can manage to catch it. Francie and Neely pick the biggest one there. They have always dreamed of having a big Christmas tree, but it's going to be way more than they can handle. But by some miracle, they manage to catch it, even though that tree seller is showing them no mercy. After they catch it and know that they are going to be able to take it home, the tree seller says to them, "And now get the hell out of here with your tree, you lousy bastards." Francie had heard swearing since she had heard words. Obscenity and profanity had no meaning as such among those people. They were emotional expressions of inarticulate people with small vocabularies. They made a kind of dialect. The phrases could mean many things according to the expression and tone used in saying them. So now, when Francie heard themselves called lousy bastards, she smiled tremulously at the kind man. She knew that he was really saying, "Goodbye. God bless you." That may be the most New York thing I have ever heard. A lot of heart among all the swear words. This section that I just read is actually a really good representation of the writing style in this book. It's very simply written, but she really has a knack for powerful, poignant phrasing. At one point in this book, Francie is thinking about her mother, and she's trying to think of a way to summarize her mother. and she comes up with "Mama never fumbles," and that is such a perfect way to describe her mother. So although the writing is very simple and very easy to get through as a result, it is certainly multi-layered. I was really touched by this book, but I do wish, not unlike The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, that someone would have put this book in my hands when I was a young girl. This book has all of the elation, pain, and confusion of growing up that I think would have provided a lot of comfort to me during those years. If you have not yet read this, I highly recommend that you do so. I found it very deserving of its classic status. The other book I would like to review in this video proved to be a very interesting mirror image of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and that was All Among the Barley by Melissa Harrison. Where A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was published 75 years ago, this one was just recently published in 2018. Although the time period and the characters in both of these novels are very similar, there is a very stark contrast between them. That is that Smith's classic work is set in a very urban area, while this book is set in the British countryside. It is the autumn of 1933, and Britain's wounds from the First World War are just beginning to scab over. Our main character, Edie, and her family are farmers. They mainly grow cereal grains, which are not growing very well, and this family is struggling. Edie, like Francie, is very bookish and very capable, but not very popular. She does have an older brother, but he is very frequently off with their father doing farm work, and she has an older sister, Mary, but she has recently moved out to get married and now has a small infant. In this moment of isolation for Edie, someone enters her life. This is a woman who is wearing men's clothing, very odd at the time, named Constance. She is in the area to observe and write about the rural traditions that she both thinks are fading because of modernization trends, and also that she has almost an obsessive reverence toward. Edie begins to look up to Constance in a very big way, although a lot of the country people are not that pleased to have her around, including Edie's mother. Tension begins to build and build up until harvest time, when everything will change. Of the two novels that I'm discussing today, this is by far the more literary of the two. It does create that strong sense of atmosphere, just as A Tree Grows in Brooklyn does. It is far more lyrical and uses some seriously gorgeous nature writing to set the scene. I have always thought that there is something holy about dusk, when the light begins to fade and the fields lie empty. The lamps are lit indoors and the birds are seen winging to their roosts before darkness falls. The evening sun was low and warm, my shadow running over the soft heads of wheat, and somewhere nearby a turtle dove was making a low, contented sound. Alone, I felt all my confusion ebb and my soul expand. Yes, that was it exactly, as though I was part of everything, and everything loved me and reached out to me somehow. Our quiet cornfields, the evening sky, the trees, and then a door hawk began to chirr. The feeling faded, and I shook my head and picked up my pace. But the story in this one is a lot more focused as well, with more distinguishable themes. The theme of change is a big one in this book. Constance, who was there to observe the rural traditions, is from the upper classes. She has these really big political notions, and she's fixated on the idea that keeping the old traditions alive is the best way to keep a hold of what it means to be English. But when she comes to the country and starts sharing these ideas amongst the farmers, she's finding that they don't entirely agree with her. It's almost as though she forgets that these people live off the land, and so they have to be ready for all the change, all the curveballs that nature is throwing at them. That's just a part of the farming process. And she also seems physically incapable of understanding that these people are welcoming of technological advancements if it makes their lives easier. It seemed to me, at least, that this was a pretty big class statement, that those with the most to lose are going to be the ones most resistant to change. The way that war touches both of these books is very different as well. World War I was just kicking off when A Tree Grows in Brooklyn ends, and yet in this book, we still feel the fallout of World War I, even though this is 1933. It casts a very sorrowful shadow over this entire book and all of its characters. Edie was even born in the interwar years, and even she feels it. It isn't easy to conceive when you are growing up that the world could be any different than how you find it, for the things you first encounter are what normality comes to consist of. and only the passage of time teaches you that your childhood could have been in any way otherwise. Even so, it was impossible in those years not to know that there was an army of men missing from the fields and farms. Some of them were our fathers and uncles. Many of them were farm boys or horsemen. We knew them by the empty pews at St. Anne's and the seats untaken at the Bell and Hare, the hay rakes and the scythes leaning unused in the barns, the ricks thatched indifferently for the want of skilled men. Although most farmers themselves were excused, the war left gaps in the land and the working of it. And even if you were born in peacetime, as I was, you could feel it everywhere. It makes Edie even more isolated from her family since they are all still carrying the weight of the war on their shoulders, and Edie never experienced it. I do also need to note that Edie's mother, Ada, does bear a lot of resemblance to Francie's mother, Katie. Both are strong, hardworking, and utterly exhausted women who we, as readers, can see as having sacrificed so much of themselves to be wives and mothers, much more than their daughters can ever see. But I do see one big difference between these two women, and that is, although they are both dealing with alcoholic husbands, Katie Nolan is dealing with an inept but still loving one, whereas Edie's mother is dealing with a mean drunk. And those are very different things. And here near the end of the review comes the biggest difference between these two books, that although this is a coming-of-age tale, it is told from a grown-up Edie's point of view. She's looking back and telling you her story. There is a lightness and a joy to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn that this book just lacks. This one is a lot more gut-wrenching, and I think the main difference between them is their tone. Even though I was infatuated with the writing in this book, I have a very strong suspicion that it will end up being A Tree Grows in Brooklyn that ends up staying with me the longest. If you have read either or both of these books or are now interested in reading one or both of them, I would love to hear from you in the comment section below. Or if you have any general comments or questions, those can also go in the comments, but you can also find me on a variety of different places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you in the next video. Bye.